in a few seconds here, if that works.
All right. Yep. Nope, that's fine. All right. It's 4 o'clock. So I'd like to go ahead and call to order the Wednesday, April 14th, 2021 Capital Funding Protection Committee. So we can go ahead and have a roll call, please.
Devin Reese is not going to be here. Oscar Delgado. Charlene Bybee.
Here.
Paul Anderson.
Here.
Bob Lucy. He is not going to be able to make it. Jeannie Herman. Justin Ivory. Justin, I thought I saw you. Are you there? Andrew Diss.
Here.
Elise Bonkowski.
Here.
Sophia Cardinal.
Here.
And Dave Solero.
Here.
Chairman, we do have a forum.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. We'll move on to item 1.03, which is public comment. Comments from the public are invited at this time on topics not specifically addressed elsewhere in the agenda. Due to the current state of emergency declared by the governor, members of the public wishing to make public comment for the Capital Funding Protection Committee must submit their comments via email to capitalfundingcommittee@washoschools.net. Any public comments received will be forwarded to the Capital Funding Protection Committee or for its consideration, consistent with the emergency provisions noticed above. And Kendall, we received the one from yesterday. Are there any other public comment at this time?
Correct. The only public comment at this time was from Jeff Church.
Okay. Seeing no other public comment, if we could move on to item 1.04, which is action to adopt the agenda.
Move to adopt.
That was Andrew
second.
Diss. Okay.
Sophia Cardinal seconds.
All right. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. That'll take us on to item number 2. Again, with those in item number 2, items for presentation, discussion, and possible action. Due to the current state of emergency declared by the governor, members of the public wishing to make public comment about an item on the agenda must submit their comments via email to capitalfundingcommittee@washoschools.net. Any public comments received will be forwarded to the Capital Funding Protection Committee for its consideration, consistent with the emergency provisions noted above. And Kendall, do we have any public comment in any of the items in section 2?
We do not.
All right, thank you very much. Seeing that, let's move to item 2.01, which is approval of the minutes from December 3rd, 2020, Capital Funding Protection Committee.
Charlene Bybee, I move to approve the minutes from the December 3rd, 2020 Capital Funding Protection Committee as presented.
Paul Anderson, I'll second.
All right, having a motion and a second, go ahead and take the vote. And all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Takes us on to item 2.02, which is a presentation and discussion on the anticipated cadence and workload for future meetings of the Capital Funding Protection Committee. And I believe Mr. Searcy is going to take us through this item.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Adam Searcy, Chief Facilities Officer for the record with the school district. Hopefully everybody can see the draft schedule and topics for 2021 was attached to your packet right now. Talking with the team, we wanted to consider laying this out on a regular basis to try and give everyone a little bit better feel for what to anticipate that we hope to accomplish together as a committee across every year. We look ahead pretty hard with all of our projects and try to lay these out in a way where they're not abrupt or surprising to any members of the committee, and that we have ample time to incorporate feedback and adjust to any concerns that the committee might put forward. So anyway, I'll walk through this. We tried to lay out approximately a year's worth of look ahead items. Again, this is draft. These are not agendas, but we're here this evening in April talking about basically these 3 items. Does that look better for you if I show the entire page or zoomed in? Zoomed in?
Zoom in because we're blind. Or at least I am.
All right, so here we are in April. We're going to cover these items that have been agendized, and we'll go into the details on these later this afternoon. Looking ahead, of course, we meet every other month, typically every even numbered month. So in June, we're anticipating bringing a legislative update that may or may not have some new bills relevant to the school district that could impact capital. So we'll wait until the dust settles a little bit and give everybody an update on impacts there. And then we'll also hopefully have a couple of items for action. Historically, we've brought these in June on the fiscal year cycle, both for our capital renewal plan, and we'll talk about these in more depth later, and also a separate item likely new this year specific to IT device investments. So both of those are anticipated for action. These are, again, annual programs related to the FY22 expenditures there. So 2 months later, we're talking August. We're in a new fiscal year. All of our terms, your terms, run on the July 30th or June 30th, July 1st schedule. So if there are any new members, we'll make some introductions and have another round of committee elections, that type of housekeeping. We are slated for an audit recommendation status report. That's something that there were a couple of recommendations that you may recall came out of last year's audit of the capital program, and we wanted to provide a status report on the record of our incorporation of those recommendations. And then in August, we hope to bring our first substantial update on the progress of the design of the new Debbie Smith Career and Technical Academy. Moving into the fall, we'll have started our new school year by then, and we'll have a new set of information related to enrollment, potential growth and overcrowding, budget updates in general, a lot of information once we start the new school year. So that would be relevant to this committee. We just have this penciled in as a probable informational item. And then you'll see the Debbie Smith CTE almost as a standing item. We're going to bring this to the committee multiple times, may have multiple meetings where action is requested as we move towards potential funding approvals, either at the end of 2021 or early 2022. Again, the idea there is, to really give you early and often opportunities to provide input and help guide the direction that the project's going. And of course, make sure that those updates are available to the public as well. And then rounding out the year, again, some annual type of action. Historically, we've brought an annual evaluation report as required by the board policy for this committee at the end of the calendar year. So we'll be continuing on with that. And we'll talk a little bit more this evening about the Rio Wrangler area elementary school. This is an elementary school that we anticipate needing to open next, whether or not the growth and enrollment numbers this fall semester warrant moving forward with that project this year or not remains to be seen. But should it be deemed necessary, we would need to go to this committee to gain approval for construction funding. That's on the radar at this point as a possibility for potentially December 2021. So, that kind of rounds out the 12-month or really the 2021 look ahead. I think that the discussion on this was that this might be helpful to everybody. I know we meet every other month, so we all can get a little rusty, occasionally even cancel a meeting when it's not necessary. I think, to be valuable use of everybody's time, but, to go 2 months or even 4 months between meetings, it's hard to develop a pace and have sort of the pulse of where the capital program is going. So this was our first stab at trying to put something out there brief, but that hopefully will keep everybody kind of flowing in the same direction, if you will. Any questions or discussion on this one? This one's for information only, but really wanted to get it out there for everybody's consideration. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Are there any questions for Mr. Searcy? Not seeing any. So with that, Adam, if you don't mind moving on to item 2.03, which is the presentation and discussion on the origins and governing documents associated with the Capital Funding Protection Committee.
Absolutely. I'm just gonna reshare this, make sure everybody's got this presentation up. And so this one is one that we put together, again, for information and discussion only, but really in consultation with the committee leadership, felt that enough time has passed and enough circumstances has evolved since the establishment of the Capital Funding Protection Committee that it might be good for all of us to take a little look back at the origins of the Capital Funding Protection Committee, better understand the guiding documents associated with it, and just have a discussion on the roles and responsibilities, really the important value that this committee plays for the school district and really the community. And on that note, I did want to mention and specifically thank all of you for adjusting your schedules. This is an extremely valuable committee to the school board and the public, and our mix up on the scheduling last April 1st. And so appreciate everybody's flexibility to be here this evening. But with that intro, I want to turn it over to Mr. Pete Etchart to begin with the first few slides.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pete Etchart, Chief Operating Officer for the Washoe County School District. So thank you again for the request to have this item on the agenda. So this same presentation will also be given to the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees on April 27th, because they also had an interest in hearing this. So we'll begin on with the committee origin and history. We'll talk about the governing documents of the committee and what we do to comply with the requirements of the documents. And then we'll talk about the current status of where we stand today. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to read through this, but the last 6 years have definitely been incredibly busy, but I think they've also been very productive. And this committee, as Adam said, has provided a great service to the district in that time. And I envision that continuing into the future. So I'm going to begin by providing a little more detail on how we got to where we are now. Can I go next slide, Adam? So the state legislature created the Oversight Panel for School Facilities through statute in 1997. So over the years, it has been slightly modified, but the bottom line for us is, since we are a county over 100,000 and under 700,000 in population, is that the Oversight Panel for School Facilities has two statutory requirements. One, to review and approve or disapprove a request by the Board of Trustees for the issuance of a general obligation bonds, and two, submit a biennial letter to the Legislative Council Bureau with recommendations for financing the cost of construction, design, maintenance, and repair of school facilities, and that's turned in by July 1st of every even-numbered year. And the membership requirements of the Oversight Panel for School Facilities is also spelled out in statute, both the elected members and the citizen members with specific expertise. And I'll be honest with you, when those were the only statutory requirements that we had, it wasn't always easy prior to 2016 to get a quorum at meetings based on the very limited functions of the Oversight Panel for School Facilities. Next slide. However, that all changed as we went forward, and our needs for an additional sustainable source of capital funding was taken to the legislature. After a failed attempt to secure funding through the state legislature and county commission in 2013 and 14, the legislature created what was called the Public Schools Overcrowding and Repair Needs Committee, or PSORN as it's called, in 2015, primarily through the efforts of the late Senator Debbie Smith as part of Senate Bill 411. The PSORN committee was comprised of 15 community leaders, including representatives from Reno, Sparks, Washoe County, and the legislature, including the late Senator Smith. The committee also included a representative from the Realtors, Resort Association, EDON, AFL-CIO, Builders Association, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Oversight Panel for School Facilities, the late, great Mike Cate. And, so it really was a very, very diverse committee. So the committee looked at all the capital needs of Washoe County School District. And after a lot of work, at the end of the day, they requested that Washoe County place a 0.54% sales tax increase question on the 2016 ballot. However, prior to the ballot item, PSORN desired added transparency and oversight of the Washoe County School District capital program. And I need to stress that this request was not because there was any identified issues with capital projects. In fact, capital projects had just completed an independent audit that the department passed with flying colors. It was mainly because PSORN realized, and very correctly in my opinion, that the public desired greater transparency when being asked to increase revenues to the district. Therefore, the Capital Funding Protection Committee was born. And I underlined the word protection because the PSORN committee really wanted the word protection in the name of the committee that would provide this oversight. And I will talk about the guidance documents on the next slide, but I wanted to stress that the first meeting of the Capital Funding Protection Committee was 6 months before WC1 was considered by the voters in November of 2016. So Washoe County School District was committed to this greater transparency and oversight regardless of the outcome in November of WC1. Next slide. So the PSORN committee really liked the committee makeup of the oversight panel for school facilities. And I agree, it's a great makeup of elected officials and, like I said, citizen members that have specific expertise. So PSORN was very supportive of adding the additional transparency and oversight duties to the oversight panel. But again, they wanted the committee to have the word protection in it. So therefore, we have two committees with the same exact membership, and the added transparency and accountability requirements that were put in place for the Capital Funding Protection Committee came from the guidance from NRS 393 that basically says that counties over 700,000, mainly that's only Clark County, may, and I want to emphasize the word may, add additional duties and requirements to their oversight panel for school facilities. So that's basically exactly what we did. We mimicked what was shown in NRS, and it was put into board policy that the Capital Funding Protection Committee would have those additional transparency and accountability provisions. And that was helped to be created by our Chief General Counsel and created Board Policy 9405. But one of the key aspects I want to focus on is that the Capital Funding Protection Committee is independent from the Board of Trustees in many ways. And this is outlined in the bylaws and in Board Policy 9405. The Capital Funding Protection Committee makes an independent recommendation to the Board of Trustees. If the Board of Trustees disagrees with the recommendation, it must go back to the Capital Funding Protection Committee. If the Capital Funding Protection Committee sends the same recommendation back to the board again, the Board of Trustees can either, one, approve that recommendation, or two, if it decides to finally override the Capital Funding Protection Committee recommendation and approve a different, go a different direction, it must state publicly why it is going against the recommendation of the Capital Funding Protection Committee. And I think that's really important. We've never faced that, and hopefully we never will, but that is how the process works. Now, I'm going to pass this back to Adam to really go through those individual transparency and oversight duties and requirements of this committee.
Thanks, Pete. The next several slides are pretty dense. They're direct excerpts from the Board Policy 9405, the school board policy that governs this committee and the Bond Oversight Committee. Again, pretty dense, somewhat redundant in some areas, but I just wanted to try to help everyone draw connections between the specific passages in this board policy and some of the regular actions that we have and continue to perform together with this committee. So, right off the bat, I wanted to highlight the passage here: work cooperatively with the board. As Pete described, it's actually very unique, if not the only committee that has that sort of additional layer of authority relative to the school board, in that the school board cannot unilaterally overrule this committee. While they rarely do, they can change the recommendations from various committees at the dais from other committees. They don't have that ability with the Capital Fund Protection Committee. So, working cooperatively and then in response to the educational needs of the pupils within the school district. Again, this is an excerpt originating from the NRS, as Pete described, but I think that was just noteworthy as kind of foundational to the function of this committee. Speeding ahead, really, this is section 6 in the actual board policy. The item 3 talks about, these regular reviews of programs of projects for renovation and the construction of new facilities. So, while this might not be a 3-year plan, we do annually bring a 5-year plan to the committee, as well as we presented a 20-year facilities plan as recently as 2019 to the committee. And as you guys are all aware, regularly bringing updates and items for action associated with construction of new school facilities. Some redundancy in these, but just thought it was important to highlight the frequency that we do bring annual programs of projects and individual capital projects to the committee for information and discussion, as well as for action. Moving forward, 6.4, we've got annual evaluations. All right, so this is something that we've completed annually since 2016. Our report forwarded then to the trustees, reviewed in a significant amount of detail and posted publicly, both for the committee and the school board, to really reaffirm that transparency and accountability and allow for checks and balances and course corrections if needed, if we see trends of performance that need to be adjusted. So looking forward also to 6V, also similar, arguably redundant. We talk about annual evaluations at minimum, making recommendations on such evaluations. I wanted to use the opportunity here to talk about the quarterly reports that we've recently begun introducing as well. This is in part from the most recent recommendation of the internal audit. So while not explicitly an annual evaluation, we're now adding to our past work, giving somewhat more regular updates of the progress of the projects that had previously been authorized by this committee and the board. Moving on, review any changes to a prototype design, development of custom designs, substantial program changes to planned projects. So as we've seen before, the educational specifications, really the guiding documents for all of our prototype designs, have been reviewed and approved by this committee since 2016 at all levels. We've reviewed and approved new educational specifications for elementary, middle, and high schools through this committee and the board since 2016. We've also done the same, gone through the same process for the CTE high school ed specs most recently. And then also a couple of examples related to kind of the prototype designs. Many of you remember the fly-through visual simulation videos for our new elementary schools back in 2017, but also most recently the new high school design, now Proctor Hug up at Wild Creek, and some very recent design reviews associated with the new prototype being built at O'Brien that was based on the previously approved educational specifications, but was a new design prototype itself. Again, just a couple of examples of how our routine practices with this committee are in alignment with the requirements outlined in this policy. I'll just keep powering through these. Again, apologize for the density with all of these words, but there's a lot of duties here that are spelled out in this board policy, and this is really us trying to be diligent with the written word and also collaborative with this committee as far as what the expectations really are for this body to perform. Again, more about evaluations. You can see how important the accountability and oversight is associated with this committee over the work of the capital improvement plan. We're going to talk about that a little bit here later in the agenda, but the annual evaluation report submitted really at the end of the year, as well as intermittent audits, have addressed this item thoroughly. There we go. Slide 10, we've got recommendations regarding management of construction and renovation of schools. So we talk about this often. This is very much within the purview of this Capital Funding Protection Committee, and is something that we can and do discuss on almost all of our major construction and renovation projects. And then again, prepare an annual report summarizing the progress. Expanding on that from annual to even quarterly in a different format as a result of the recommendation of the recent audit. So those are really some highlights, a little bit of redundancy, but I think everybody can see the theme. This is all still a little bit of a history lesson. This was a board policy that was developed from the NRS and adopted in 2016. Culminating now only in November 2016 passage of the WC1 ballot measure. And we threw this up partially just because it's interesting graphic and some interesting data, but really, I guess the point that I wanted to highlight on this slide was how important it has been and continues to be to all of us who were associated with this pre-WC1 or prior to 2016. Some of the work that Pete described, and everybody that's been a part of this since, to remain in alignment with the goals and expectations, the actual items on the ballot measure, really the promises that were made to the public, resulting in passage of this measure in 2016. This committee is a very important part of maintaining that level of trust and fidelity with the original plan, even as circumstances change and evolve, and we need to discuss different developments in the plan, maintaining not only the history and foundation of the committee, but each and every meeting, knowing as we go forward, are we in alignment with our core principles and our governing policies? It's kind of what we wanted to emphasize here. So we've got a little bit more moving forward related to the financial component of WC1, the actual sales tax projections and measures and performance since 2016. I want to turn the floor over to School District's CFO, Mark Mathers. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. So the Peace-Horn Committee laid out a 7 to 8 year financial plan totaling, as you can see here on this slide, a little over $1 billion. And that consisted of, I'll break it down into kind of 3 sources. And these were really sources, not revenues. And I know there's been confusion on that by some, but they utilized the municipal financial advisor, J&A Consulting, Marty Johnson, which some of you may know, to help do some forecasts. And those 3 sources were the sales tax revenues generated by the new 0.54% sales tax. Then our property tax revenues that generate from our debt rate for the school district. And then the third source is actually the bond proceeds that are received that pledge either the sales tax revenues or, in the case of rollover bonds, those property taxes. And so, again, the plan was $1.096 billion. And so a question we often get is, well, how are we doing? How did those projections kind of fare when we look at our actual performance since passage of WC1? And so in the middle of the slide, you can see we've actually received sources greater than what was forecast for that 8-year period in 4 years. So we've actually received $699 million in either actual sales tax revenue or proceeds of WC1 bonds we've issued, and then $429 million from, again, property tax revenues we received plus the proceeds of our rollover bonds. And so, it's always a little tough to make an apples to apples comparison. When we issue bonds, we're in essence pulling forward future revenues to pay for those bond proceeds. So to make a more apples to apples comparison in terms of our actual revenues, the bottom portion of this slide shows what were the assumptions the PSORN committee used versus, again, actual growth rates. And so the PSORN committee and their financial advisor went with a 5% annual growth rate for those WC1 sales tax revenues. They knew there would be a recession somewhere along the way, but just for simplicity's sake, they assumed 5%. And we've actually achieved growth in sales tax revenues of just a little over that at 5.11%, even with the recession caused by the pandemic. So that's great news. And then they used a assumption for annual growth rate of our property tax revenues of 3%, very conservative. And we've actually seen really strong property tax growth over this period, almost 6% growth. So we've outperformed the expectations of the PSORN committee, which doesn't always happen when these long-term forecasts are first formulated.
Thanks, Mark. So that's a little bit on the financial performance of the program since 2016, 2017. I wanted to take the next couple of slides and just talk a little bit about the physical performance. Most of you are familiar or have been a part of the review and approval of many of these projects, but just sort of an infographic snapshot of the projects that we have completed and are in progress, as well as the projects that are a part of our 20-year horizon plan out 2025 and beyond. This particular slide doesn't even capture some of the support facilities work. This includes 5 new schools that we've opened to date and a total of 10 new facilities that we will have opened or on track to open by 2023. Again, all of these previously identified as a part of the WC1 ballot measure, emphasizing our sustained commitment to those specific projects and also validated by the current growth and needs of the district students. Similar information on the next slide, but also adding in the addition at DeMonte Ranch High School, not a new school, but still a very, very important investment in our school facilities. We've also got these support facilities, nutrition services, central kitchen, dramatically expanded and renovated, critical in support of the growth of the school district, as well as some significant investments in our transportation yards, also needing to mirror the growth of the overall school district. And then maybe most notably or underrepresented is the over $150 million that have been invested into our existing schools as a part of our capital renewal programs annually. These are our flooring replacements, our roofing replacements, our repainting, our windows, things like that. Our existing schools investing in our HVAC systems and making sure the assets we do have are well maintained. This is something that we've all worked very hard on. We are, proud of. This community should be proud of the investment that we have made, and really just also want to emphasize how important it is, and this committee's role is in the stewardship of this program and these funds and delivering on our promises very carefully and publicly and specifically. In support of that, I wanted to end really on that note around transparency and accountability. As we have all discussed and received feedback and reevaluated and added to our levels of transparency and accountability. We really started with the data gallery here on the left. This looks different than it did in 2016, but this was something that was developed in 2016 to help communicate to the community really how significant the deferred maintenance backlog was, and to show a complete window into the school district's asset management database through a public website on really what those facility needs are. Since that time, we've developed a very robust public website. This has an extensive amount of information available on it on all of our projects. Again, all publicly available. There's an associated Facebook page with this that's really just more for promotion than public information, but we share a lot of active action associated with our projects there. And that's very much a part of this program, is keeping the public apprised of what our actions are. I feel they appreciate that as much as any public database that they have access to. So, and then finally, mention of the most recent independent audit that most of you are all a part of as well. Upon the recommendation of this committee, took it even one step further to secure that independent auditor and go through that report successfully. So that's the conclusion of the information we wanted to present. I appreciate you hanging in there with us. Would really welcome any questions or discussion, but I would add, in putting this presentation together, Pete, Mark, and I and others, looking back on where we've come and recalling the actions that occurred in 2015 and 2016 and even 17, 18, 19 as we worked to get this program up and running. Really pleased, but I felt it was a healthy exercise for us all to sort of document this and make sure that we remain consistent with the original intentions. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Are there any questions for Adam? Go ahead, Justin. Hey, Justin, your microphone's not working. Member Anderson, you want to go ahead, jump in there?
Yeah, actually, I don't have any questions for you guys, but I just want to say, Mark, Adam, Pete, I truly appreciate all the work you guys have been doing, working with us here on the committee, as well as the presentation that you just did. And in the couple of years I've been involved with y'all, I've been thoroughly impressed with the work you've done. When we've pressed you on questions and wanted to understand things, you guys have been very forward and transparent with us. And I just want to commend you guys. Thank you. And I think it sums it up with the last thing that you talked about, Adam, is that even from an independent audit standpoint, that you guys are doing well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Member Bybee, go ahead.
Thank you. I can't see you. I can still just see the screen. So I don't know if you can see me waving or not. I would also like to thank everyone for the presentation. And for those of us, I've been here since I was here with the Oversight and then transitioned into the very beginning of the Capital Funding Protection Committee. And for those of us who have been here the whole time, this was a good look back at where we've been and where we've come from there, and kind of reminding us how much has been accomplished. It is really, sometimes you just get so focused on how much the work at hand, how much work, we're all doing in everything we do, that we forget to kind of reflect back on where we started and then really look at what we've accomplished in that time. And so even though I've been here the whole time, and I know for newer members, it obviously is beneficial for you to see, where this committee has gone. a good refresh on what our governing policies are on the NRS that set this whole thing up. And it just, I think, was really valuable information and reminders to all of us of really our purpose here, which is so critical. And it's so important, not just for all of us that are representing the elected side, but for those of you that are representing, business and industry in the community, and what you bring to the table to make this committee so valuable and so efficient in what we've done. And I think I've been most impressed through the years. This committee takes its work very seriously, and we're the oversight. We are the protection of our taxpayer money that is funding the projects that we do, our property tax and our sales tax. And I think we all take that very seriously, everyone that served on this committee with me. And I appreciate that and the work we all do, but appreciate the work of staff in allowing us to make the progress that we have. Thank you so much.
All right, Vice Chair Ivory, you want to give it a shot again?
Give it a shot. Can you hear me now at all?
Yeah, we can. Thanks.
Adam, thanks. I know I kind of recommended that maybe we bring this thing forward, and it definitely helps, I think, to kind of inform everybody. The only other thing I'd ask is, can you just give a quick oversight on the relationship between the BOT and the CFPC, so that everyone's kind of under the same board, since we're both kind of the same thing, I guess? Is that right?
So the BOT, the Board of Trustees, and the CFPC, or are we talking the oversight panel?
The bond oversight, because it's two committees in one, really, right?
Right. Pete, do you want to take a stab at that? It is the same membership, and it's governed by the same board policy. They do have separate duties and will need to, adjourn or convene independently. Can you articulate or?
Yeah, I think hopefully maybe questions on what I said in the presentation. I mean, the oversight panel for school facilities, or bond oversight, as a lot of people call it, has been around by statute. And again, it only has those two requirements. One is to approve or disapprove any general obligation bonds that the board puts forward that Mark would bring to you. And two is to write that letter every other year, which really kind of goes into a file. I think we've never heard back from the state on that letter ever, but we have to write it by statute. And that's it. That's all the oversight panel does. Now, as I said, Clark County added additional responsibilities onto their oversight panel, and we could have done the same thing, but we're not a county over 700,000. So I'm not 100% sure. I never asked the question of whether we could have added those additional responsibilities onto the oversight panel, but it didn't really matter because, as indicated, the Public Schools Overcrowding and Repair Needs Committee really wanted that word protection in the title. Good or bad, I think they wanted to tell the public that this group was created to protect the interest of the taxpayers, making sure that that money was going to be protected. And so that oversight and accountability portion, I think, was really important to them, and rightfully so. I said a million times, I think, during WC1, that no other organization in the state of Nevada has this kind of oversight. None. And there's no school district in this country that has any greater oversight and accountability than the Washoe County School District. And I've said that a lot of times, and no one's ever come back and said, "Oh, I can tell you somebody who has more." I mean, it really is a statement that I think that goes a long ways in this community, but we are talking a lot of money. This is a very hefty budget. We know that, as Mark went through those numbers. When we start talking in the billions, that's a huge responsibility. And so again, I just want to thank all of you and thank you for the kind words. It's a big responsibility you have, and we take it also very seriously from the staff perspective.
All right, if I could maybe just follow up, and then Pete or Adam, so just because you guys were there at the beginning, when WC1 was written and it was basically spelled out kind of in a really tied the district's hands, and this money could only be used for capital funding improvement. What was that tied back to the rollover bonds or the property tax stuff? was that kind of tied into that also, or did we keep the same freedoms we always had with those two pots of money, right? Because I think we're pulling from 3 pots total. So the original 2 pots of money, are they kind of, do we feel as a committee, should we feel like they're bound to the same requirements that WC1 is under, or are they under different controls?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll start this, and I'd like to turn it over to Mark about, how Mark's group makes sure that we meet the requirements of how this money can be spent. But I can tell you, when the PSORN committee looked at this, they looked at it as one, basically, for lack of a better term, one pot of money. So we said, this is how much money that we have existing. It was like $380 million that we had projected over the next 8 years. And then we said, what is needed? And it was like that $1 billion of money. And so then the difference, it was around 700 and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was like $730 million that was needed. Then they looked at how are we going to fund that $730 million? And that's where the WC1 came in. So when the PSORN committee looked at this, they looked at it all being one pot of money that was going to be used for capital needs. And the things that were stressed upon was building new schools for overcrowding, and it was repair needs for our existing schools. Whether it's paving a parking lot or rebuilding the entire school like we're doing at O'Brien right now. I mean, it was that refurbishment of existing schools, and ultimately to make sure that all the students had the same classroom experience, whether they're in a brand new school or an older school. Now, we all recognize that's going to take a lot of time. This doesn't happen overnight. But the PSORN committee really looked at it as the same. Now, that being said, there are different requirements for the rollover property tax money versus the WC1 sales tax money. And Mark, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, there are specific Nevada revised statutes that govern the use of rollover bond proceeds or for pay-as-you-go projects that are funded by property taxes. And it includes facilities, equipment, that includes IT devices, even textbooks. So actually, the permissible uses of rollover bonds or property tax monies are a little broader than WC1. And so for WC1, we looked at the ballot language. And we, actually confirmed this recently with our general counsel as well as bond counsel. What are the kind of prevailing language here that governs use of WC1? Kind of as part of this presentation, they confirmed. You look to the ballot language. You don't look to the arguments for or against, but you look to the ballot language in terms of what is an eligible use of WC1. And so, every time we issue debt or propose a project, we are looking to those 2 areas, NRS for property taxes, WC1 ballot language for that. We work closely with bond counsel, tax counsel, and our own counsel when there's an interpretation required, if that helps.
All right. Are there any other questions from the committee for Adam, Pete, or Mark? Really do appreciate the work that you guys put into this. I think it was very helpful for all of us, and I think it's really going to be helpful as well for the Board of Trustees when you present this to them, just as a reminder of really what the role is that we provide for them in understanding this. I think it'd be very, very helpful for them as well. So. All right, before we get on to item 2.04, just want to make sure for the record, we note that Member Herman had joined us about 4:20 this afternoon. So if we can get that on the record, I'd appreciate that. And then with that, I'd like to move to item 2.04, which is a presentation, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval of the fiscal year 2022-2026 5-year capital improvement plan to the Washington County School District Board of Trustees. So I believe Adam is going to be kicking this one off as well. Thanks.
I sure will. Thank you. Adam Searcy again for the record. This is our annual presentation of our 5-year capital improvement plan, now fiscal year 22 through 26, if you can believe that. So starting off, we've got the technicality, the NRS requirement for the 5-year CIP, also reaffirmed multiple times, as we just discussed, by Board Policy 9405 associated with Capital Funding Protection Committee. So a very important part of the work that we do and the oversight that you all do with us as well. I'm going to touch a little bit on the process here throughout this presentation, and we are going to get into some detail on the revenue streams. So very good segue from the last question we just discussed. The content of this 5-year CIP is really all encompassing. So it does include all of the revenue streams that the school district has available to put towards capital projects. They are, as CFO Mathers described, bound by different constraints in some areas, but they are all put together for the purposes of this entire program. Always important to talk, provide some context about really what we're here to do on this one. This is an item for action. We're asking for your support and recommendation towards the Board of Trustees to adopt this. This is a valuable planning tool that helps us make sure that we're well positioned for the future, but it is not an actual authorization of the projects within it. We can and will come back to you for every major project depicted in this program, and it may change, and it will change as any plan does into the future. So while this is required to be submitted and approved by the school board, we're still going to come back for individual approvals on projects and major programs within it. Okay, so just a little bit about how we got here. I mean, it's really all about demand and resources. Just with any plan, at least annually, of course, nearly weekly, we're reevaluating our needs and our resources to try to address things as they come up. We're looking, of course, first at growth demands, enrollment growth, looking at capacity needs across the district. But then also very carefully at our assets and renewal needs throughout all of our facilities. We talk often with this committee and the school board about our asset management database and the priority-based data-driven manner in which we develop these programs of projects. And then also looking at non-school facility related needs or requests, support or central services types of things such as IT, police, transportation. Academics have small portions or needs addressed as a part of this process as well. This is all collaboratively done internally, ranging from talking to our plumbers and electricians in-house to our, as I said, leadership in school, police, transportation, and IT departments to best obtain the totality of the needs, putting that together and then marrying it with our resources. Extensive financial modeling in the near term and the short term, a variety of scenarios, looking at potentially higher growth revenue scenarios or lower growth revenues, and really balancing that to right size the program and match the finance needs potential to the growth or the demand that's forecasted. And then finally, these preliminary recommendations are again vetted through sort of the superintendent's office and executive staff, and making sure that we haven't left anything out, or that some of the proposed projects in the CIP are supported by the executive team. So that brings us really to where we're at this evening. Again, a very public portion of the process for your input and for the public's viewing. I think on this next slide, actually the next couple of slides, we'll talk about the financial portion of this part of the process and turn the mic over to Mr. Mathers again.
Thanks, Adam. So obviously a constraint here, like any agency CIP, is our revenues and funding sources we have. And so just just to be clear, we do use a mix of debt financing and when we can, pay-as-you-go sources. So we have used cash to fund, for instance, Bohatch Elementary, and we'll try to maximize our use of cash and avoid interest payments on debt whenever we can. And as we talked about in the previous item, there are two major revenue sources that fund the capital improvement program, the WC1 sales tax, of course, and property taxes. We budgeted $66 million in property taxes in fiscal year 21, and the state's forecast for fiscal year 22 property taxes that are generated by our debt rate, it actually crossed the $70 million threshold. So it continues to grow. And then we also have a smidge, a little under $6 million of our share of the government services tax that we all pay on our vehicles. So the next slide is an excerpt of the document that was also attached to this item, providing a consolidated summary of sources and uses, and then also behind that fund by fund description of sources and uses. But you can see here sales tax revenues increase at a fair clip. We've, for simplicity's sake, just assumed 5% growth every year of the 5 years here. So we start at 53 million or so and end up at around 65 million at the end of the 5 years. Next line, about the second line under revenues, we are planning 2 WC1 bonds. We'll use our remaining authority from the debt commission to issue bonds next fiscal year. And then we've got a $100 million series planned in year 4. And then you can see about the fourth line down, we have 2 series of rollover bonds planned as well, a $60 million issuance in year 2, and then again, a $100 million issuance in year 4. What you don't see here, just to be clear, are the projected property tax revenues that we collect from our debt rate. Those are actually received in a debt service fund, not a capital fund. And so you don't see that. We have conservatively estimated 3% growth annually of that revenue. And like we talked about in the last item, the growth is almost double that, but we want to be conservative. And those property tax revenues, again, secure and are pledged to pay debt service on rollover bonds. And so you can see at the bottom, total resources by fiscal year. And this 5-year capital improvement program is actually a little smaller than last year's, but still significant. Sources over the next 5 years are estimated at $685 million. And this just provides a pie chart. If you're wondering, where does that $119 million beginning fund balance come from? That's the blue slice of the pie. We actually have a $40 million balance in our WC1 sales tax revenue fund. That's what we use for pay-as-you-go projects. So we have 40 million there, and then we have 47 million left over from our bond sale of rollover bonds that we did in January. It was a $131 million sale, and we have $47 million left. So that's 87 of the 119 million you see.
Okay, so I'm going to take the mic back just for a few more slides and kind of give some overviews of the major elements of the CIP, and then dive into the other side of the ledger. I should note really for the public that all of these documents are attached to the agenda, so hopefully you should have the full CIP available to you if you care to dive into it. But really, the CIP is going to be composed of major projects and the annual capital renewal program, which is broken down into quite a number of capital repairs and renewals, roof replacements, window replacements, repainting, things of that nature, and then some critical IT infrastructure aspects as well. So the other side of the ledger, Aside from the sources, we're looking at the proposed construction project expenditures here. Want to highlight, we'll go into some of these in a little bit more detail in a minute. Most of these are familiar to you from past CIPs or past discussions with this committee. I mentioned Rio Wrangler Area Elementary School. That one's very much on our radar. We'll talk about that again in a minute. Looking out further into the horizon, we have long forecasted a need for a new high school in the Cold Springs area to relieve primarily North Valley's high school, soon to be our most populous high school once the new Proctor Hug opens. So that's on our radar. It's very much growth dependent, but analyzing the projected population growth and development projects within the Cold Springs and North Valleys area, we see that as breaking into this 5-year horizon, as well as another elementary school after the Rio Wrangler Area Elementary School. Very much to be determined and growth dependent, but something that, you know, is likely to be either in the Spanish Springs area or the North Valleys area. It should come as no surprise to anyone who lives or commutes through those areas that there's significant growth and development in those areas. So that's on our radar as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about these core school investments on these subsequent slides, but I'll just draw attention to their inclusion in the CIP. This is not something that was a part of the 5-year CIP last year, something that was always, and it was a part of the WC1 program back to 2016. And we're excited to begin talking about that and planning for that next aspect of this program. You'll see here on this line item, the annual capital renewal program. So again, that is between a $40 million plus annual investment in a host of projects we'll talk about in a moment. And then some other miscellaneous repair and renewal investments to round this slide out. These are also expenditures on this second slide that we have on the screen here. I want to highlight the the IT device refresh as something that's relatively new part of the program. This is something this committee heard about recently in regards to the purchase and centralized management of school district owned and issued student devices that we're going to be including as a part of our 5-year CIP and project to bring to you for action approval alongside the capital renewal program separately in June. But that's forecasted as a part of this CIP at approximately $4 million a year annually. We've got, and we'll look at this in a different pie chart here in a moment, but we've got program administration. So that's salaries and overhead associated with the staff within the capital projects department and in support of the delivering development of all these projects. School bus fleet purchases and some other school district operations expenditures that are eligible expenditures through these funds, as Mark described, on review by legal and bond counsel. So these are really the two summary pages for our proposed 5-year CIP. This is a similar pie chart depiction of that same information, just sort of grouping these expenditures into larger categories: major projects, school expansions, new school construction, this core school investment slice that I'm going to talk about again in a minute. This capital renewal, very important, extensive, ambitious investment annually into all of our existing schools. And then, of course, these minor components, including our debt service, rounding out the total expenditure summary here. All right, so just a couple more detailed slides. I won't get into too much depth on the Debbie Smith CTE project. You're beginning to become familiar with it. We're going really in the second half of 2022 or 2021. This committee is going to get very familiar with the progress and details of where we're going with this, but they're actively underway with design. Very excited, honestly, to unveil what they're developing. It's going to be a tremendous asset. As we've talked about before, once those students go into summer break 2022, we're going to be ready to begin construction and renovation on that campus. Those students will then start school at the new Hug High School over at Wild Creek. This campus will remain dormant for a school year while that major construction and renovation is taking place, and reopen in 2023 as the Debbie Smith CTE Academy with enrollment from across the district into their new facility. So that one is really front and center on this CIP for 2021 and then into 2022. This one, Rio Wrangler, I wanted to make sure was on your radar. It's on this CIP for housing. There's tremendous growth and student generation in the South Meadows. This is, some of the best graphics that I could get my hands on to try and illustrate what we're talking about here. But we're down in Damani Ranch area. If you can see this cursor, we've got Damani Ranch High School here, Brown Elementary School, Nick Polikitis, and Double Diamond Elementary School. This is Rio Wrangler Parkway, going up from Veterans to Damani Ranch High School. And this is an 8-acre piece of property that we own outright. The school district has developed with De Loretto in exchange for some other land in the South Meadows. So we own that property. We've designed the school. We're really have it on the shelf ready pending enrollment demands. You can see this graphic on the left. Rio Wrangler Parkway is on the right. And so you can see there's a planned subdivision really buffering that school from the parkway and backing out onto the open space wetlands area, if you're familiar with that part of town. So potentially we're planning for this. It may not be necessary. As with all of our major projects, we are prepared for growth when and only if it is ready, not before. So we may bring this back to you for action in fiscal year 2022. We may not, depending on circumstances. Again, just really wanted to make sure you were familiar with it at this opportunity. So
hey, Adam, real quick,
yes.
Since you touched on growth in the district, when I look around, the area is booming. I know that Councilwoman Bybee and some of the other electeds on the committee are always dealing with affordable housing issues at Reno and Sparks City Council and in the county. Let's say the growth doesn't match up with, the growth in housing we're seeing doesn't match up with kids enrolling in school. What happens to the capital funds? Do they just sit in the account and they build up and they accrue, or do you start spending more on deferred maintenance in those cases when we're not building a school?
Little bit more of the latter. Actually, it's a good segue into some of the next points I wanted to make. There's plenty of work to do, for sure. Deferred maintenance and also core school investments. Really, we're seeing likely in the 2022-2023 horizon timeframe where we'll be opening O'Brien Middle School, an expanded Swope Middle School, a new high school at Wild Creek Proctor Hug, potentially this Rio Wrangler Elementary School also moving forward. We're seeing us reaching an inflection point in kind of the post-WC1 capital program, whereas prior to 2016, we had this tremendous pent-up overcrowding issue where we had schools in danger of going on double sessions and whatnot. And since then, we've really been moving as quickly as possible to carefully but aggressively build additional permanent capacity. We can see within this 5-year horizon, looking closely at the enrollment forecasts, the development planned and projected versus what our capacity looks like, an opportunity to throttle back a little bit on that new school development, still having those projects in the plan, the new high school in the North Valleys, the new elementary school in South Meadows, and possibly another elementary school. I mean, like I said, the development in those areas are very real, but that does still leave us with additional resources, financial resources, to go back to that original WC1 ballot measure that talked not only about all of these new schools and all of those capital renewal investments, but also this concept of core schools investments. And really, this is something that we did a bit of in the early 2000s. The school district referred to them internally as revitalization projects. They went through an extensive scoping exercise and almost like an educational specification programming exercise to converse with the school community about what the most valuable areas of investment would be for these existing schools, and executed several dozen of these types of projects. Many of you may have been a part of them or experienced them in some form or fashion. And I guess what this is intended to introduce is the reality that we will likely be able to embark on a similar chapter, if you will, of this post WC1 capital program. A series of projects focused not only on elementary, but also middle and high schools, likely, that are not capacity driven. Not necessarily, this is just an image of rendering of Swope Middle School that really was capacity driven to allow us to put the sixth graders up in middle school. But similar schools such as Dilworth or Sparks Middle School that are of a similar building type that could certainly benefit from a robust investment beyond just a roofing replacement or a window replacement, something more substantial that would put those academic environments on a par with the newest middle schools or elementary schools across the district, making sure that those core schools are seeing similar levels of investment to our new schools and are providing an academic environment that is similar and equivalent to what kids in brand new schools are experiencing. So this is, I don't want to say a black box. This is the initial introduction of taking that next step towards this. We have design funding in fiscal year 23 in this 5-year plan, and then capital funds projected in the later years of this 5-year CIP. But this is something that we're really excited about, that I think that these schools deserve and need. And we see the inflection point, as I mentioned, between resources and demand pointing us in this direction, still being able to meet the needs of growth in a healthy way, you know, when it's appropriate and needed in the future, but being able to direct our resources a little more aggressively towards these types of projects.
Thanks, Adam. And from what I heard you say, and I just wanted to make sure that it was on the record, you know, you're not just going to build schools unless there's the need and the demand for it. And you're going to make sure that that money is going to where it's most needed, whether that's revitalization or whatever needs. So thanks for the response. Thank you.
Yep, that's correct. Thank you. Okay, those were some of the highlights of the major projects that I wanted to touch on. This is a slide sort of trying to summarize our capital renewal program. This too will be invested in heavily. We downsized the capital renewal program in fiscal year 21 in an abrupt response to the initial onset of COVID. Fortunately, our capital funding revenue streams have weathered the COVID pandemic and associated recession rather well. And things are looking up across the board. We are proposing to restore the level of investment to pre-COVID funding levels. And we're very excited about that. Every time, I think on our last board meeting agenda 2 weeks ago yesterday, we had some $5 million worth of miscellaneous projects across 8 or so different schools being awarded. And, you know, just really excited. These are repaving, roofing, windows, painting, carpet, all of the above, some small, some rather large, boiler replacements, things like that, that are important investments into our existing assets, but absolutely do have a positive impact on the culture and the atmosphere within those schools. So We'll talk about this more in June. We have a series, I like to refer to these as slices of the pie, a series of different categories within the program: carpentry, HVAC, electrical, ADA, all sorts of different categories. We try to size them a little bit according to their level of impact on the core mission of the organization. Really, how close does these projects affect the learning environment and the students within the school? So as you can see, we put a lot more money into HVAC than we do, say, for example, parking lot pavement. But still, we don't box anybody out. We don't put all of our eggs in one basket. We're putting $250,000 this year into tennis court replacement, for example. That's not our number one priority, but it is a valuable component of the phys ed curriculum and athletic activities at all of our high schools, things of that nature. This image is taken from the construction of a new single point of entry. If you guys are familiar with the pinwheel schools, I believe this, I'm not sure which one this was taken, but that's just an example of the types of projects that we program into our capital renewal program. And again, we'll bring that one back in June for a specific look and recommendation of approval. This is just the planning phase where we're talking about putting pre-COVID funding levels into that. We'll populate the program and bring it back to you in months to come. So, and then kind of rounding out the proposed list of projects, I wanted to just give a nod to some of these non-facility related investments, looking at our transportation assets, school police, various safety investments. I mentioned the single point of entry. Those obviously are facility related. We've also, as a part of the CIP, have mention of the IT device portion of the CIP that I touched on earlier. And then, just a nod to, again, the data nature by which these projects are prioritized and allocated, and the transparency and accountability that our business systems allow us to provide to the public. This information is publicly available, as are essentially all of our financial transactions and payments to vendors and things of that nature have a public facing page to our data gallery, in addition to all of the transparency and accountability that we work with this committee and the school board to provide. So a couple more slides that are more financial focused, talking about where we're at and how we derived kind of our projections. Turn the mic back over to Mr. Mathers. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. I'll try to go through this quickly, even though this is exciting for a few of us, probably not for most of us, but anyhow. So we hinted at this, but just to kind of retrace, we were, like most agencies, very concerned when COVID hit as to what that would do to sales tax revenues. And so we budgeted basically a 20% drop in that revenue, a $10 million drop. I am happy to report in the last line that for this fiscal year, our sales taxes are up more than 5%. Even with the pandemic, last fiscal year, sales taxes were up nearly 5%. I think it was 4.8%. So with all the stimulus circulating and the diversification of the Washoe County's economy, as Adam said before, we've weathered the storm and actually haven't skipped a beat in terms of receiving sales taxes near our original projections of 5% growth. So that's nice. In terms of the next slide, then this just shows you those monthly historical revenues. On the far right to the bottom, you can see back in March, April, we saw significant decreases in our monthly sales tax revenues, but since May, we have rebounded and returned to our normal pattern of ever-growing monthly sales tax revenues. Before the pandemic, there had only been 1 month that had seen a lower number than the prior year month. So the worst appears to be behind us. And again, there's a ton of federal stimulus money that will enter the economy. So we think we're in good shape going forward. Knock on wood. Again, we hinted at this. Our property tax revenues have been very strong. They're up 6% fiscal year to date. I just checked the March numbers, and that was the last of the 4 major installments of secured property taxes. The state is projecting 6% again for fiscal year 22. So that was a nice surprise from what we had heard from the county treasurer's office preliminarily. The only, somewhat question mark here is most of you've heard about the Incline Village property tax lawsuit. Involves 2 of our agencies. I won't go into it, but that is a bit of a question mark. The debt rate share of that liability that the county has said we would have is a little under $7 million. So we will see how this is resolved or turns out, and then we can report back to you. Our debt coverage on our bonds, just to share, this is an important facet of what we do, it remains strong. We will continue to see coverage roughly of 25 million between projected revenues and debt service. They're kind of tracking along through this 5-year plan. So significant buffer for any kind of economic contraction or what have you. So lots of room here. And then on the next page, we show the debt coverage on our rollover bonds. These are, again, a little dated numbers. Probably the smallest coverage we had was next fiscal year, but now with the greater projected number from the state for property taxes, will probably be close to 10% coverage, which is pretty strong for a stable revenue source like this. And then you can see beginning in fiscal year 27, a lot of the rollover bonds that had been issued in the 90s start to roll off. So our coverage will only improve each and every year based on this plan. So next slide, just to again cover, we feel like we're conservatively managing our debt, even though it is significant. Again, we have strong coverage, and the rating agencies have noted that, and they recently reaffirmed our AA rating. Again, in addition to strong coverage, we have significant reserves in our debt service fund. We had 52 million at the end of last fiscal year and 18 million in our WC1 debt service fund. And again, we expect that to actually increase to 40 million by June 30th of 21. We talked about how revenues have outperformed the PSORN projections. Another issue of outperformance, another component of that is that I think PSORN had used interest rate assumptions of between 4 and 6%. We've been consistently below that. In January, we sold 25-year bonds at an interest rate of less than 2%. So that was completely unexpected when PSORN was doing their work. So all of these things contribute to really strong security for the payment of our debt service. And, we never want to get in a situation where we have to access reserves, but they are there. I mean, there's nearly 70 million there for that purpose.
That's a wrap for the content on this one. I really wanted to close with a couple of these bullet points, emphasize our commitment to transparency and accountability, and really emphasize our ability to meet the needs of growth when and if it's necessary, but only when and if, and continue to make significant investments into our existing facilities, including the commitment to the original WC1 proposed program, inclusive of those core school investments. Again, this is a recommendation to the school board regarding this plan. It is not an approval of any of these projects specifically. They will come back to this committee for individual approval in the future, but we are looking for action on this item. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Adam. Looks like we've got a couple of questions, and I know I've got a couple as well. So, Member Cardinal.
Hi, everybody. Sophie Cardinal for the record. First off, thanks for this great information. I really enjoyed the presentation. And of course, Mark, you know I love the document you put together of all the funding. It's really neat to see where the money's coming from and what it's going to be used for. But Mark, I did have a question. I know you mentioned the incline lawsuit, but I'm just wondering if Washoe County School District does end up having to pay, will the funds actually have to come out of capital projects then?
You know, we haven't provided options to our Board of Trustees. We're kind of in a sensitive situation. So if we are confronted with that situation, we'll provide several options to them. And you know, that's kind of a policy decision they'll need to make.
Okay, I'm just curious if your fiscal year 22 budget has like a line item for that.
Based on where we're at today on this issue, it is not included in our tentative budget. Of course, we have a final budget that's due by June 8th for school districts, and then an amended final budget we can do and present in June, so later in June. So again, if things get resolved, depending on how things turn out, we may include it in our budget, but I can't say at this point.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious. Yeah, I had other questions, but during the course of your presentation, you answered them. So that's all from me. Thank
Great.
you.
Are there any other questions on this item? Vice Chair Ivory.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, it was a great presentation. A couple of quick questions. On the IT expenditures that you're anticipating, Adam, is that going to be mostly equipment or is that programming that we're talking about on these IT expenditures?
Great question. Appreciate the opportunity to clarify. In our capital renewal program, where I've talked about roofs and flooring and things like that, we have historically included IT hardware, like servers and switches and other sort of aspects of the IT infrastructure that are bolted to the school building type of, as just a way of describing that, like a facility asset, not furniture, fixture, and equipment. What I was kind of highlighting in this CIP is the IT device refresh. This is a new aspect of the CIP that we're proposing to centralize the management of and the annual refresh of school district owned issued laptop devices or computer devices to the students. So that's something that we have not done in the past, and we've patchworked together in really an inequitable and inefficient way in the past. Something that we're going to bring back for specific approval and discussion in June, but it's something as a part of this 5-year CIP we're noting as a standalone item that is really for student devices.
Okay, and then maybe a follow-up on that. I'm assuming that when we're spending $20 million over a 5-year period on laptops, that we would, I'm assuming somewhere in the district, we are applying for matching grant money to turn that 20 million into $40 million worth of equipment or whatnot. I'm assuming that's the direction we're going.
It is. If anyone would care to elaborate on that, thank you, Mark.
Yep, we absolutely. We do that when we can normally, and we have accessed a significant amount of grant funding for acquisition of new devices. The problem a lot of times is to replace those devices, to refresh them after the end of their useful life. Grantors are a little bit more reluctant to do that, but we will absolutely try to match and leverage our own monies with grant monies whenever possible.
Okay, and then Rio Wrangler, I believe you said we was gonna if we needed to, we take a look at that in December. That school design is, correct me if I'm wrong, but that one will be identical to the existing elementary schools that we're building now. That's not a new design to fit that lot, right? We're building the exact same structure as we've been building for elementary schools.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
I got a chairman for you, got a motion for you, Mr. Chairman, if you're ready.
All right, yeah, just one quick, I've got one quick question, then one comment really quick before I jump in there. Member Dis, appreciate that. Adam, between years 2 and 3 on the annual renewal, you show about a $10 million bump in there. Do you have an idea of what that shows? It runs at like 36 million for a couple of years and then runs up to 46 million. Just curious if there was something driving that or what your projection was there.
That is a great question. Good comment. It's in part in response to market inflation, that to do a similar scale of scope in out years, it's likely going to cost a greater amount of money. And also in part in response to really our internal management bandwidth. We've got major projects underway, tailing off a little bit in years 2 and 3, and increasing the level of investment into that capital renewal program was feasible given our resources, and that's what that increase is reflective of.
All right, thanks, Adam. And just the last thing, I think I need to put it on the record for you all. As an asset manager in a past life here at Washoe County, I am continually impressed with the asset management system that the school district has. And it makes me feel very comfortable with with those projects that need to come up to replace the pavement and roofing and everything else. I think you guys have done a great job. You're probably one of the shining stars of asset management, at least in our local community. So I wanted to throw that out there. And with that, I will kick it back over to Member Dis.
All right, make a motion that we recommend approval of the fiscal year 2022 through 26 5-year CIP to the WCSD Board of Trustees.
Sophia Cardinal, I second.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Not seeing any, so that passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much. That will take us to item 3.01, final public comment. So comments from the public are invited at this time on topics not specifically addressed elsewhere in the agenda. Due to the current state of the emergency declared by the governor, members of the public wishing to make public comment to the Capital Funding Protection Committee must submit their comments via email to capitalfundingcommittee@washoeschools.net. Any public comments received will be forwarded to the Capital Funding Protection Committee for its consideration consistent with the emergency provisions noticed above. And Ms. Scott, I didn't see any in my inbox.
There is no public comment.
All right, thank you very much. We'll take us to item 3.02, which will be our next meeting on June 3rd, 2021. And then item 3.04. We'll just go ahead and adjourn the meeting. So